Welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, I'm Dr. Shivika Sethi, a national level faculty for microbiology and the author of the book Mastering Microbiology for all PG entrants and academics. Now today I'll be discussing the rest of the microbiology multiple choice questions based on the pattern of the NEET PG entrance 2020. Now before I start my discussion, I would like to remind you not to forget to subscribe to my channel PGMEE Microbiology Prep for notifications whenever I upload a new video for helping you out. For any queries, you can contact me on my email, which is micro.queries@yahoo.com. For academic discussions on microbiology, you can join my Facebook group, Microbiology Prep by Dr. Shivika. And for comprehensive videos of medical microbiology to help you for PG entrance as well as university exams, you can subscribe to the Marrow app. Now let's get started with the MCQs. Which of the following is not true about Japanese encephalitis? Humans are reservoirs, pigs are amplified hosts, transmitted by Culex vishnui, and vaccination of pigs can control transmission. The answer to this question is that humans are reservoir. Remember, in Japanese encephalitis, humans are dead end hosts because they develop insufficient viremia to transmit the infection to the mosquito. Pigs are amplified hosts. It is transmitted primarily by Culex tritaniorhynchus, but in India we also have Culex vishnui as the vector. And since pigs are acting as the amplified host, if we vaccinate the pigs against JE, we can control the transmission, right? Now here is the distribution pattern or the endemicity of Japanese encephalitis. It is endemic in India, Southeast Asia, China, up to the Far East. And this is the transmission cycle of Japanese encephalitis. The natural cycle runs between RD birds. RD birds are also called as water birds like storks, herons, egrets, cranes, etc. All these four, remember them: storks, herons, egrets, and cranes. These act as natural reservoirs. Amplifying reservoir is the pig. So many-fold replication of the virus occurs in the pigs, right? Now remember, generally if you're simply asked what is the reservoir host, it could be either birds or it could be pigs. But sometimes you get a specific question asking you which is the amplifier host, then it is the pig. Which is the natural reservoir, then it is the RD birds. Two girls in the same class are diagnosed with meningococcal meningitis. Their 12-year-old close friend is in fear of contracting the disease. What advice would you give to her? 2 doses of polysaccharide meningococcal vaccine, 2 doses of conjugate meningococcal vaccine, single dose of meningococcal vaccine. No vaccine should be given as the exposure has already occurred. Right, so this is a case of meningococcal meningitis. We are being asked basically what will you do for these 11 to 12-year-old close friends. Now ideally what we give for post-exposure prophylaxis is antibiotics, which would be either rifampicin, or it could be ciprofloxacin, or it could be ceftriaxone. Rifampicin 4 doses over 2 days, ciproflox or ceftriaxone we would just need to give single dose. But since these are kids, 11 to 12 adolescents, the Center of Disease Control recommends that all adolescents should also receive immunoprophylaxis, right? So 2 doses of meningococcal vaccine should be given to all adolescents, one at 11 to 12 years and the second one between around 16 years of age, right? So of course here the question is mentioning just the conjugate vaccine, which provides protection only against the serotypes A, C, W and Y, but ideally now we also have the meningococcal B vaccine, Men-B vaccine, that also is recommended by the CDC, right? So against all these 5 serotypes, 2 doses should be given to all adolescents, right? So apart from antibiotics, we will also give vaccine to this friend. The recent influenza A epidemic was due to which of the following? And the answer to this is H1N1. Okay. Now, influenza viruses, they belong to the family orthomyxoviruses, all of which are negative stranded negative single-stranded RNA viruses, and what is unique about their genome is it is a segmented genome. Influenza A and B have 8 segmented genome, influenza C has 7 segmented genome. And what is this helping us to remember? That these viruses can show genetic reassortments. New strains can arise by genetic reassortments. Now remember, on the basis of the nucleoprotein and the matrix protein, there are 4 serotypes of influenza, or 4 types of influenza. A, B, and C infect humans. D does not infect humans. It causes influenza in cows, etc. Further on, influenza A is further having several subtypes on the basis of hemagglutinin and neuraminidase antigens, right? So we have H1N1, H3N2, H5N1 according to the H and N. These are the subtypes of only influenza A. Now, in the recent times, which are the important influenza pandemics? It was in 1918, it was the H1N1 pandemic. 1957 to 58, H2N2. 1968, H3N2, and this persisted on for several years. And in 1977, a new strain of influenza A arose, that was H1N1, right? But this did not cause a pandemic at that time. It just caused, some parts of the world. And since that time, 1977, it has coexisted with H3N2 along, right? So at present times, we have influenza A strains causing influenza worldwide, 2 strains, H3N2 as well as H1N1. But in 2009, there was a new strain, a variant strain of H1N1, which was called as the swine flu. It emerged from pigs and it replaced the previous H1N1 viruses. This is the one which is existing nowadays, right? This novel strain, it was a quadruple reassortment of viruses, influenza viruses from pigs, birds, as well as humans. So gene rearrangements had occurred, quadruple rearrangements to give rise to this pandemic strain, variant in H1N1, right? And in June 2009, the WHO declared the pandemic of this variant strain, and it was declared over in August 2010. And still it is persisting as a seasonal flu strain. Okay, now remember, the currently circulating influenza viruses are influenza A, 2 strains, as I said earlier, H3N2 and the variant H1N1, and the type B influenza. These are the currently circulating strains. Drug of choice for invasive aspergillosis: amphotericin B, voriconazole, posaconazole, and echinocandins. The answer to this question is voriconazole. Now, this is the morphology of Aspergillus. Remember, how do we typically describe it? It is a hyaline septate molds, and the hyphae show dichotomous or acute angled branching or branching at 45 degrees. This is so characteristically mentioned in the questions. And this is, you can see the conidiophore. It has a vesicle, a swollen vesicle, from which finger-like projections called as phyllides and medullae arise. And from these, you can see the chains of conidia that are arising, right? Now, invasive aspergillosis, the most common site of invasive aspergillosis is the lungs, okay? And the most common species which causes this at Aspergillus fumigatus. Its spores are very small, so easily inhaled and reach the terminal bronchioles. The risk factors for invasive aspergillosis are neutropenia, very, very important to remember, glucocorticoid use, chronic granulomatous disease, advanced HIV, leukemias, immunosuppressive therapies, right? And most common type is pulmonary involvement, from where it usually spreads to the brain. Diagnosis of invasive aspergillosis is done by histological examination, in which what I just talked about, hyaline septate hyphae are seen showing acute angled branching. Then we can culture it on Sabrot's dextrose agar, and also we can detect the galactomannan antigen. That's a very important antigen that is specific to Aspergillus. Galactomannan antigen is detected in the serum of the patient, and beta 1,3-D glucan antigen is also detectable. Of course, this is detectable in several systemic fungal infections like pneumocystis, candidiasis, etc. And also finally, we can use the molecular method. The preferred drug of choice is voriconazole. That was the answer. But apart from voriconazole, we can also use the echinocandin, caspofungin. We can use posaconazole and lipid formulations of amphotericin B. So this was recently asked also in PGI, which of the following drugs can you use for invasive aspergillosis? Which of the following helps in bacterial adhesion? Cytoplasmic membrane, mesosomes, fimbriae, and lipopolysaccharide. And the answer to this question is obviously very easy, fimbriae. As we know, bacteria have two types of fimbriae, which are also called as pili. Common fimbriae or pili help in adhesion, and the sex fimbriae or pili help in conjugation. Which of the following is a category A bioterrorism agent? Answer to this question is Bacillus anthracis. Now, all pathogens or their products which can be used for the purpose of bioterrorism have been categorized by the Center of Disease Control into three, category A, B, and C. The highest risk ones are called as category A, and what are their properties? These are easily disseminated. They have high mortality rates. They can cause public panic and social disruption, and they require special action for public health preparedness. And which are the category A? There are just 6 of them: Bacillus anthracis, botulinum toxin, Yersinia pestis, Francisella tularensis, then variola, that is the smallpox virus, and the viral hemorrhagic fevers which have high mortality rates like Ebola virus, Marburg virus, Lassa fever virus, Crimean Congo hemorrhagic fever viruses. The category B and the category C, these are the properties. Category B are moderately easy to disseminate. They are associated with moderate morbidity and low mortality. So the current pandemic of COVID, it comes in category B. COVID belongs to category B. SARS coronavirus 2 belongs to category B. Right, and category C, this contains the emerging pathogens which have with the potential for easy availability, easy production and dissemination, and they are also associated with high mortality and morbidity. So we have Nipah virus, Hendra virus, Hanta viruses, they come in category C. Superantigen is produced by which of the following? Strep pyogenes is our answer. The rest of the options, Clostridium perfringens, Vibrio cholerae, Staph epidermidis, do not produce any superantigens. Okay. Now, superantigens, what are the important points you're going to remember about them is that unlike normal antigens, superantigens do not need processing. They don't need processing. They directly bind to the MHC class 2 of the antigen presenting cell at a site lateral to the usual antigen presenting groove, and they need to be recognized just by the V beta part of the T cell receptor, and hence they are able to be recognized as well as then activate at least 5 to 20% of the helper T cells. So remember, superantigens are also called as T cell mitogens. They can activate a large number of T cells, T cell mitogens. So Streptococcus pyogenes produces the pyrogenic or erythrogenic toxins A, B, and C. The immunoglobulin structure was shown in the figure, and this belongs to which category? That's such a simple question. You can see a dimer. You can see two antibodies which are linked by the joining chain. So the answer to this is immunoglobulin A. Right, now immunoglobulin A in our body exists in two forms. The serum form is a monomer. So serum immunoglobulin A is a monomer existing like this. So two heavy chains and light chains having a molecular weight of 160,000 daltons. And it is the second most abundant antibody in the serum after IgG, 10 to 13%, and has a half-life of 6 to 8 days. The second type of immunoglobulin A is secretory form, and secretory IgA provides mucosal immunity. So very important point to remember is mucosal immunity is provided by IgA. So this secretory form is present as a dimer. It is present in this form, and there is a J chain, and also there is a secretory component, and this is going to protect the immunoglobulin A from the mucosal enzymes break down by the proteases present in our mucosal secretions. So that's the function of the secretory component. And another point to remember is that this secretory component is not produced by the plasma cells, it is produced by the mucosal cells. So when the IgA is being transcytosed outside into the onto the apical surface, at that time the secretory component is added on. Which of the following? So this is again an image-based question. We are shown the eggs in the stool, and which we are being asked, which is the common soil-transmitted helminth responsible for this infection. And the answer to this is very easy: Trichuris trichura. That you can see the characteristic barrel-shaped eggs, and you can see the bipolar mucus plugs. And remember, Trichuris eggs, when they are passed out by the humans in the stool, they are not yet infectious to man. They need to develop in the soil, then only they become infectious to humans. Now here are a few pictures of the egg of intestinal nematodes. On the left hand side, you can see this is the egg of Ascaris. There are two types of eggs seen in the stool. This is the fertilized eggs. You can see the mammillations, and you can see the single ovum inside, so it is not yet infectious to man. And this is the unfertilized eggs with an atrophied ovum. Okay. Then we have the eggs of hookworms, the Ankylostoma duodenale and Necator americanus. This is the characteristic oval egg, and you can see a crescentric space at both the poles, and that's beautifully seen in the lower one, and you can see either 4 blastomers or 8 blastomers when it is passed out. Then we have the plano-convex egg of Enterobius vermicularis, which has the folded larva inside, having a safety pin appearance. You can see this folded larva, plano-convex egg of Enterobius. And finally, what we just got a question on, Trichuris trichura egg. The mechanism of bacterial resistance to penicillins via beta-lactamases is by which of the following? Beta-lactamase. That's very easy to remember, that beta-lactamase enzyme is going to break the structure of the beta-lactam ring. So that's what is the answer. It breaks the drug structure. Now that's the typical beta-lactam ring of a beta-lactam antibiotic, which include penicillin, cephalosporins, monobactams. That's the beta-lactam ring, and the beta-lactamases, they break this beta-lactam ring, right? That's the mechanism of action. And the beta-lactamases produced by various bacteria have been divided by Ambler on the basis of their sequence similarity into 4 groups A to D, out of which A, C and D, these are called as serine beta-lactamases. They are called as serine beta-lactamases because they act by serine ester hydrolysis mechanism, and the category B beta-lactamases are called as metallo-beta-lactamases because they require the zinc ion to catalyze that reaction, right? Thank you very much.